Friendship isn't the big things, it's a million little things. Hello there friends, and welcome to this, another episode of A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is where we break down and discuss episodes of TV shows that you may not have even heard of. I believe these TV shows need a little more love, and that is what this platform is here to do. Each week we will be covering different shows from all over the globe. We'll be breaking down each episode, giving you the main highlights, and going through it bit by bit. But for now, I think it's best that we find out what's on the menu today. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 11 of season 8, and today we're going to be continuing with our coverage of Loudermilk. Now, this is a show that I haven't seen before, and I'm really enjoying it. It's been making me belly laugh, very much similar to Santa Clarita Diet. I think you'll have heard in the last episode that I covered this, how much I'm enjoying it. It's genuinely got such a good vibe to it. It's quite downcast at times, but also you can see where he's going to go with the character. It's not a story that's not been told before, where someone has a redemption arc after being so downtrodden, so you know where it's going. I've just watched the recent episodes of Shrinking, for instance, and that has a very similar vibe to this. So I'm really enjoying the show, and it's really funny, but let's catch up with these characters anyway. So, Sam Loudermilk, played by Ron Livingston, is a recovering alcoholic who is a support group leader, and he is basically very, I don't know how to describe him. He's a dick, is all I can think to say right now. He tends to be very dismissive in the way that he speaks to people, but he's also really trying to help people in his own unique way. And it seems like he's just got a tongue of acid at times because he's so bitter about what's happened to him in his life. We find out in the first episode what actually happened, and it was that one night when he was drunk, he was driving home with his partner in the car, and he wrapped the car around a post. He survived, his partner didn't. And that's sort of where we've come from. He's got this past of drinking and ended up in this bad situation, and now he's regretful of all that. But the one thing that he can't bring back is his partner. He lives with his sponsor Ben, who is also an alcoholic but has recently started drinking again. And of course, that is not the best way to be when you're actually a sponsor of someone. And then we met Claire, who is a teenage girl who has been drinking and getting into drugs, and she was a stripper at one point because the influence that her boyfriend had on her wasn't the best. She was looking for a figure that would care for her and love her, very much like her father did before he died. Sam was approached by Claire's mother to try and help her out, and we're going to see how that relationship develops over time. And then we've got Alison. Alison seems to be the person who's going to be the love interest of the show for Loudermilk. However, the complication comes when we find out that she has a boyfriend. She's just moved in next door to Loudermilk, so they're in the same building all the time, and they seem to be having a lot of interactions with each other. But for now, we're just going to have to see how that goes. But I think we're all caught up now, so let's get into the show. This is Loudermilk, Season 1, Episodes 4-7. Episode 4, It's All About the Beans. So this one starts in Loudermilk's at an art exhibition, and he's just being his usual self. He's stood looking at this piece of art, and it's one of those contemporary pieces, and it's just two bags, one filled with oil and one filled with water, and the piece of art is called Oil and Water. He stands there, and some woman comes over and talks to him and tells him about the art piece, and he seems quite engaged with what she's telling him. However, then when she says, "Oh, that's actually been sold," he says, "Well, I would have preferred piss and shit all over my wall." A couple turn round and say, "Hey, you can't say things like that, that's horrible." And he just turns around and shows them the piece of art that is called Piss and Shit, which is exactly the same thing, apart from it's both in colostomy bags. And this couple just turn around and walk out. Honestly, Ron Livingston can fucking absolutely deliver a line. He's brilliant. And then we get into the episode. So they're all in session at this addict support group, and one of the guys in there, called Roger, talks to Loudermilk about something that's happened in his own life. It turns out that a company has come begging at his door because he used to be a music artist. He used to be a drummer in a band, which nobody in the group believes, which I'll come on to. But his main dilemma is because he is an addict, this company is actually a beer company, and they are trying to infuse beer with whiskey in sort of a Boilermaker way to try and sell it in cans. Of course, him being an addict feels that this isn't the right course of action for him. However, he isn't the only one in the band. And so he's trying to get his former bandmates to understand that this just shouldn't be the way that they do things, because it's just promoting people getting blackout drunk. And in the advert, it's promoting getting women blackout drunk. And it's not the kind of message that he wants to send. However, they are offering around about $100,000 for this. And when Loudermilk hears the amount, he can't believe how much they actually want to pay Roger for this. And so he asks Roger that maybe he should consider it. It might be a good thing for him to get that kind of money. But like I said, Roger was in a band, and he was played by an actor called Matt Fraser. Now, Matt Fraser has actually been a drummer in several bands, but you wouldn't believe it to look at him, and the reason for that is because he's got thalidomide-induced phocomelia, which means that there is a shortening of his limbs, so his arms are actually shorter than what they normally would be, whereas his body has grown in proportion. And so nobody can understand how he would hold the drumsticks, because his arms are so close to his body that they can't understand that he would actually be able to drum. But essentially, Roger asks if Loudermilk will go with him to see his bandmates to try and explain the situation. And reluctantly, Loudermilk says he will. Loudermilk then goes back through to see Father Michael, and Claire's mother is there, Mrs. Wilkes. She starts asking about how Claire is and how things are going and whether she's okay. Loudermilk kind of wants rid, because obviously it's her daughter and it would make his life a hell of a lot easier if Claire wasn't around. He is a counsellor after all, but there should be some sort of disconnect at the end of the day. He shouldn't have to be taking his work home with him, and that is kind of what he's doing when it comes to Claire. Even though she will probably benefit from being around Loudermilk, and probably vice versa. However, Mrs. Wilkes ends up giving him an incentive and asks him if he'll keep hold of Claire for a while, and she will give him her father's car, which is one of these huge 4x4s like an Escalade. And so Loudermilk, he's tempted by this. It's one of those things where he's not morally bankrupt, but he kind of is. He'll have a good think about it, especially when it comes to money. He wouldn't mind getting out of the situation that he's probably in right now, where he looks like he's probably living paycheck to paycheck. And he'd rather be comfortable. And this Escalade could probably sell for around about $100,000, so he'd be well off for a bit. And so he decides to take her up on her offer. So he's going to keep looking after Claire, but he now has a problem with Claire. When he heads home, he and Ben start talking about what's been going on with Claire. She's obviously been sleeping on the sofa, but she's also got a problem with the fact that she snores really bad. And Claire is not an atypical person that you would say snores, but obviously for the show, she snores really badly. And so then that night we get an example of it. So even though Ben and Loudermilk have both taken the piss out of her, we see how bad it actually is for them. And it's keeping them both up at night. And it's only hurting Ben because Ben is also drinking while he's in bed. The next morning, because obviously he's going to need some coffee, Loudermilk heads next door and he asks Alison for some sugar. He goes inside and asks if he can maybe hang out with her and her boyfriend Carl at some point, because he genuinely does want to get to know him. He obviously knows Alison a bit better now and feels that since they're living in the same building that maybe they could. And then later on that day, he and Roger go over to see his friends, his former bandmates. They try and convince him to sign this contract that guarantees them around about $200,000 in royalties. Roger isn't sure again, but this time he feels the need to actually sign the contract because why not? It's not going to hurt him having this money in the bank, and it's going to help secure his future a little bit more, so why not have it? Even though he's tried to explain the cause as to why he thinks it's a bad idea, but everyone wants to do it, so he decides to. And then Loudermilk has lunch with Carl and Alison, and while he's there, Alison excuses herself and heads to the bathroom. But while Loudermilk and Carl are talking, all of a sudden there is a man choking behind Loudermilk. He looks round, he looks at Carl Carl is like, I'm not going to do anything. This guy's a doctor, let's not forget, and doesn't want to get up and do the thing that he's trained to do. It's his Hippocratic oath to save people's lives. And he sits by and watches this guy choke. Loudermilk's like, fuck this, gets up and goes over. He helps the guy out, and this guy thanks him. When Alison comes out, she thinks that Carl has saved the day, but before Carl can take the full credit for it, a waitress comes over and says, no, it wasn't him, it was Loudermilk. And Alison feels a little bit of a tug towards him. She has for the last 4 episodes, and now she's feeling a bit more inclined to be around Loudermilk and less around her boyfriend. They sit down and Carl tries to explain himself. He then tells Loudermilk exactly why he didn't want to do anything. It's because people in that kind of situation will find any reason to try and sue you. Welcome to America. And he's like, I would have helped, but that person will sue me at the end of the day, just for saving their life, because something went wrong. But Loudermilk doesn't understand, and just thinks that it's just bullshit. He heads home, and Carl has actually dropped off a sleep apnea machine that will help Claire out with her sleeping, but when she actually starts using it, it makes her sound more like fucking Darth Vader than actually helping her with her sleep. So even though they've got this machine to try and help her sleep as well as them sleep, it's only her that is going to be sleeping at this point. Because these two are just too freaked out. Ben and Sam are just freaked out by this noise that's coming from her. By the way, she's still sleeping on the sofa, not actually on the sofa bed, because they still haven't moved the table for her. They're just lazy pricks. And then we see the outcome of this contract signing. So Roger goes to this meeting and they basically want to do an advert for this Boilermaker beer product. The executives see Roger, they see that he has this disability and they think that this is just a joke. They start to insult him, but Roger pretends not to hear any of it. Loudermilk, however, does. He tries to convince Roger not to do anything, but then they do a sound check. Roger sits behind the drums and plays his fucking ass off. It's so frigging cool watching this guy drum, knowing the disability that he has. It's just brilliant. He knocks it out of the park, obviously. He's a former drummer in real life. And the executives eat their words. At that point, Roger gets up and says, "This isn't for me," and walks out, head held high. And Loudermilk knows now that he has to do the one thing that he should have done all along. He shouldn't have accepted this car as part payment for looking after Claire. And so he decides to give it up. However, when he does, Mrs. Wilkes just ends up giving it to Father Michael anyway. So she was going to give it away, whatever. And then we see corporate America come back in again, because at that point Carl is proved right when a man comes up to Loudermilk and serves him with papers, because the man whose life he saved is now suing him because he broke his rib. It's almost as if you had some sort of Medicaid that helped everybody out. This kind of thing wouldn't happen because you wouldn't have to be insured. But anyway, that's just an Englishman talking, so we have an NHS. Episode 5, There's a New Kid in Town. Okay, so to briefly explain that title, we open with the usual group together. They're sat having a chat, but one guy keeps interrupting. They don't know his name, and they keep calling him the new guy. But every time they turn away from the new guy and start speaking to, say, Muggsy, he keeps interrupting. And he keeps talking about how there should be a policy, because it's been wet outside, that if wet shoes come into the hall, you should take them off. But he's not bothered about it, but it's obviously bothering him because he keeps bringing it up. And he just keeps saying, well, what if we get someone new in the group? But he always claims the name that he is the new guy. So the inevitable happens. As they're all talking, someone pops their head in the door and says that he has come to get help. And of course, they start calling this guy the new guy until they learn his name. Eventually we learn that the new guy's name is Tom, and when he is asked to speak about why he is at this meeting, we get a flashback from 8 hours earlier. It would seem that Tom has come into this session because someone who he works with, who keeps stealing his ideas and playing them off of his own and basically enhancing his career from this, has had Tom come into his office. He tells Tom that he's been in a bit of a weird situation and he's ended up needing to go to AA meetings. and these are court mandated. However, he doesn't want to go, and so instead he's going to force Tom to. And so that way, Tom can get the hours signed off, and this guy can just get away with it scot-free and carry on doing exactly what he's doing. Tom, who seems a bit of a pushover, just takes it on the chin and says, okay, I'll go. And this is how he ends up in these meetings, especially when Tom is told that, well, if you can't do it, I'll find someone else who will. And Tom is so eager to please that he just goes in this guy's place. So Tom has no issues with alcohol or drugs or anything, but he's going because he thinks it's going to help him advance his career. But of course now he has to lie to the group. He has to seem like an addict, even though he's not an addict. So he starts talking about how when he was younger and how he got into drinking when he was younger and how he got into drinking so heavily. And it's a very weak story compared to what you would probably hear in that kind of arena. It's not like Claire, where she ended up having to become a stripper and potentially doing other things at the age of, I think she's like 18, 19, quitting school and getting into hard drugs. It's very much, he tried a nice drink once and he thought that it was great, so he tried more. He just doesn't seem like the type of person that has an addiction. And if he was to have an addiction, it probably wouldn't be alcohol from the world that he comes from. It would probably be more sort of cocaine. But that's just me generalising. However, he convinces the group, and then just before he leaves, Loudermilk is reminded that this guy needs a sponsor. This guy needs someone to look after him. And the person who steps up is a guy called Cutter. Now, Cutter from the first episode is the big guy that picked up Claire and intimidated her when she sat in his seat. He's still sat at the back and he volunteers, which is something very rare for him. He very rarely speaks in the meetings, in fairness. And so he wants to take Tom under his wing. But of course, Tom doesn't want to be under his wing. Tom just wants to get his paperwork signed and get it all signed off for his boss, so that his boss likes him and tries to get him further up the chain. But of course, Tom can't say any of that to any of them. He has to be believable. And so Cutter really tries hard to be this guy's sponsor. He basically tells him that he'll meet him tomorrow and they'll go and have a chat and they can start the process of actually doing the steps and doing the work. And he's determined to get this guy on the right path. But this guy really isn't bothered because obviously there's nothing wrong. Or he believes there's nothing wrong with him. And so with Cutter's determination and this guy's unwillingness to actually engage, it makes it a very interesting relationship. Loudermilk, however, is in a bit of a state because when he's got home, someone in the apartments are playing music. And Loudermilk, being a former music critic, actually wrote a book called something along the lines of 500 Songs to Kill Yourself With. And one of the songs is currently being played at high volume throughout the building. He goes to investigate and finds out that, of course, it's going to be Alison. He heads inside and starts talking to her, and then as she excuses herself in the kitchen, he literally can't help himself. He's such a music snob and at times an insufferable prick. He picks up her radio player, the one that Ben bought for her, and takes it away from her. He takes it next door and all her records. And as he's going through, he only finds like one that he likes. But it's not about him. It's all about her. What does she like? That's the whole point of this. But he, like I say, he's a music snob. So he really gets on his high horse about this. And when she comes knocking, he doesn't let her in. He's stolen her property and he doesn't let her in. But neither does Ben. Ben just sits there and he's so funny. Like, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't need to do anything. But it's just his lackadaisical attitude to everything is fucking brilliant. So, of course, now Loudermilk wants to help Alison with her record collection and get her to enjoy some music that he actually likes, which, again, doesn't matter what she likes and what you like. You can like different things. You just have to put up with it. But he just doesn't seem to be willing to. And the only album that he does actually like turns out to be Carl's, her boyfriend's. So he's just not willing to get on board with this music choice. And it's really good to see her actually snap back at him and be like, you need to fucking grow up. It's not about you. This is my music choice. This is my life. Nothing to do with you. So maybe just back the fuck off. Because he does make it hard to like him, it seems. Cutter, however, is trying his hardest to try and get Tom to all types of different meetings as well. It's not just going to be Loudermilk's meeting, and he takes him across town and takes him to a different meeting. While everyone's outside just having a break, this guy comes out to Tom and starts speaking to him. He asks him who his sponsor is, and Tom says, oh, that guy. He asks, why did you choose him? And Tom says, I didn't, he chose me. And then this guy tells him, look, you can find someone else, you know. It doesn't have to be him. And it's here that Tom realises he has a choice in this. As they head away from the meeting, he speaks to Cutter. He tells him, look, this has been great, thank you very much, but I met someone at the meeting back there and they just get me, and I think that I want them to be my sponsor. He tells him information like this guy's been sober for 10 years and blah blah blah, but Cutter is literally cut up about this. It doesn't seem like he throws himself out there that often, and he has in this instance. And so when he speaks to Tom, he tells him, look, things like this trigger me, and so I need to go and speak to my sponsor now because otherwise I'll end up drinking. Tom apologises for the inconvenience, but we know that it's just bluster. He asks for his paperwork back because Cutter has been keeping hold of that, and that's why Tom's been doing everything that he asks, and Cutter heads off. However, later on that night, we see Tom in his own personal time at home, literally having some personal time with himself while watching some adult videos, and he's got a beer in his hand. And then just in the background, we see this little face just pop up in the window, and it's Cutter, and he bangs on the window knowing that this guy is in trouble, or at least thinking he is, because obviously he shouldn't be drinking. And it's just fucking great scene, because obviously he is in a certain situation at that point, and yeah, Cutter is just going to be such a fun character. Episode 6, Lay Lady Lay. So the episode starts with Tony, who is one of the group members, and he is giving a speech in the middle of the street for some reason about how the Earth is spinning around the sun, how fast that is, and how galaxies spin around galaxies and universes spin around universes and all sorts of like really deep intellectual shit. But he's looking dishevelled. He's looking like he's had a drink. And obviously he's an addict, so he shouldn't be doing that anyway. And then we realise as the camera pulls out that he is in the middle of the street. He has been talking about this, and then he justifies all of this bullshit that he's talking by saying, and that's why I couldn't walk in a straight line, officer. And we realise that he's obviously been pulled over by the cops for drink driving. Cutter, however, now is in Tom's apartment, and obviously he's pissed with him. He's trying to tell him, you need to stay on the programme, you need to not be drinking this shit, and you need to look after yourself. You're in a bad situation, like any AA sponsor would. Tom, however, then comes out with the ultimate line, which every alcoholic would, until they admit it to themselves. He says, but I'm not an alcoholic. And of course, Cutter will have heard this before. And so he starts to say, well, that's what everyone would say, and you need to basically get with the programme and you need to start looking after yourself. And it would seem that Cutter has a bit of a past when it comes to being a sponsor. It was referenced in the last episode when he volunteered and Loudermilk asked him, do you really want to be a sponsor after Ollie? Are you ready? And so now we know that there are issues, and that is why he's been so quiet, and that is why he has been so standoffish when it's come to everyone in the group. He's had problems in the past, and obviously this Ollie person is no longer either with the group or maybe even alive. Cutter, however, is pissed, so he rings up Tom's sponsor. Obviously Tom's sponsor is just a guy's name that he used at work, and when he gets an answer machine he's quite relieved. However, Cutter isn't. He takes Tom's phone and starts speaking to the answer phone, and basically says to this guy, you've got 10 minutes, ring me back. Tom thinks that's it, he's going to just carry on with his night, but Cutter sits down and tells him he's going to wait. So Tom does the thing that he can only think of. He calls the cops. Now there is a strange man in his house. He's only just really met this guy, and he is essentially forcing his way into this guy's house. Cutter says, look, okay, fine, and walks out, but the cops are already on their way. When the cops get there, however, it turns out that Cutter is formerly a police officer, and the two guys that turn up, he trained them, and so he knows both of them very well, which obviously shocks Tom, when Cutter basically says, look, I'm just trying to help this guy, you guys can go, it's perfectly fine. Now, of course, I don't agree with police officers using their power to get out of certain things, and this was a very bold move from Cutter, but I kind of like it for the story. I think it's quite a fun way to learn more about Cutter, but also for Tom to realise that he's in way over his head with this whole deal. Back in the meetings, however, when Tony is confronted by Loudermilk, it's basically because Loudermilk was the person that he called to get out of jail. And so Loudermilk starts just asking him why in group. And Tony comes out with, because his wife opened a bottle of wine. Now, I don't agree with people having wine around people, especially in a private setting like that. I don't think that someone who is an addict like Tony should have what he has. He has a collection of wine. And he was never going to open it, but his wife ended up opening it, and, issues can stem from that. Now, I agree with Loudermilk in that it is Tony's issue to deal with, and that he should have called his sponsor, and that he should have been responsible for this, but he didn't. Apparently, his wife opened an expensive bottle of wine and only used a splash of it. And so Tony basically justified this by saying, well, it wasn't ever going to sell, and it wasn't going to go anywhere, so I might as well have drunk it. So then he's asked the question as to why he was in the car, and he says, well, I've got a lockup with a bunch of different wines, and I needed something to pair that wine with, so I went to get more wine. And that's when he got pulled over. So he's his own worst enemy. And of course, I'm not saying it's as easy as that, because it's not. I understand that. But anyway, we're in the situation we're now in. So after the group wraps, Loudermilk and Cutter start talking about what's been going on with this new guy, Tom. He asks about Ollie, and he asks if Cutter is ready for this. And he says when he first met Tom that he knew he could do this. He was about ready to use again before Tom walked into the group, and it was him that is a lifeline for Cutter. So Cutter knows he can do this, and he knows he's strong enough. But of course, Tom isn't an alcoholic, and it's going to be a real mess when Cutter finds that out, if he ever does. Because the thing about Tom is he's very subservient, and we see that later on in this episode. Tom goes over to see Loudermilk and asks him about what the hell Cutter is all about and who this Ollie guy was, but before he can get any answers, Cutter has tracked him down. I say tracked him down, he obviously hasn't, because Tom tells Loudermilk that Cutter is the one that brought him here. So Cutter essentially says to Tom, we need to get out of here, you need to leave Loudermilk to do his job. Seems like Loudermilk does some cleaning on the side, and that's what he's currently doing at this time. It must be like late night cleaning that he does. And this is where both Tom and Cutter have found Loudermilk. So he essentially tells Tom to leave him and let him get on with his night. And Cutter and Tom leave. However, the next day in Tom's work, Tom is spoken to by his boss, Kevin. Kevin is the one who basically got him into this shit stain in the first place. And by no means am I saying that these groups are shit stains, because they're not. They help a lot of people. But the shit stain is obviously the fact that Tom doesn't need to be there. And it should be this Kevin guy that is there, but he's not. Tom gets told that there is a new brand on the horizon. It's a vodka brand, and they're expecting Tom to come up with the solution for it. So they're basically an advertising company, and Tom is going to be coming up with the ideas for this company. But of course, he has to use the product. He has to taste it. He tastes the vodka, and it's okay. It's a bit peach schnapsy, apparently. But of course, we know what's going to happen. At some point, he's going to meet Cutter. Cutter literally walks into his office and walks right up to his desk. And it's here we see Tom end up getting breathalyzed by Cutter. Again, he was a former police officer. Cutter then drags him through the office and stands up on the table telling everyone in the office that Tom is an addict and that he needs help and that everyone needs to start looking after him because he isn't in a good way. While this guy Kevin is literally watching on and nodding away. And so now Tom is in this fucking desperate situation because everyone knows now that he is an addict, or they believe he is an addict, and they all know that they need to contact Cutter if something goes wrong. So it's a fucking mess for this guy, and he's put himself in it on his own. He listened to Kevin and he fucking went along with it. So this is on him. At the end of the episode, there is another group session. They're all sat around talking, and this time Claire asks a question of Loudermilk. He's basically been asking, what are your triggers? What are the things that make you want to drink? And she says outright, what are yours? You ask us, we're open with you, and we tell you everything. But what about you? What are your triggers? What makes you want to drink? He starts to talk about his wife, and then the group start to talk a little bit about her as well, including one of them saying, is she hot? And it's here that Claire says that this guy's disrespectful, and in fairness he is, but Claire tells him that she's dead. This woman is dead. And Loudermilk says, no, she's not. She just doesn't live around here anymore. And this shocked me, because I thought she was dead. I've even fucking stated it in a previous episode, 2 probably, but apparently she's still alive. She had an accident. It was a bad accident. She recovered from the bad accident. She left Loudermilk. That's the story. But me, like Claire, was a bit taken aback by this. I was like, no, you said she was dead. And he said, no, I just said she didn't come out of the accident fine. But the tone of his voice just sounded so melancholy, like he'd killed her. And that was the whole reason for this mess. So you then start to reassess your relationship with this guy straight away. They all leave after this revelation, and Loudermilk is walking to his car. Just then a voice from the background rings out across the night, and he asks for a light. Loudermilk says he doesn't have a light, and this guy says, well, you always were a pussy. And Loudermilk says, hi, Dad. Episode 7, Father of the Year. And we start the episode exactly where we ended it. So again, the voice from the darkness saying, have you got a light? Loudermilk says, I don't smoke. The voice from the darkness says, well, you've always been a pussy, and we find out that it's Loudermilk's dad. And then you start to realise some things about Loudermilk, because Jack Loudermilk is a fucking asshole. Like, I don't know how he gets on in the rest of the season, whether he turns up again, I don't know, but I genuinely felt sorry for Sam throughout this, and I fucking hated this guy. I wanted to love him. I wanted to think that he was going to be the sort of foil to Loudermilk. But he's the reason he is the way he is. You can see it. But anyway, so Jack tells Sam that they're going to go out for dinner. And when they do, Jack orders him a beer, knowing that his son has just literally stepped out of an AA meeting or a support group meeting, and tells him, look, I didn't know it was beer as well. I just thought it was hard alcohol, like whiskey and stuff. Like, I didn't know you were an alcoholic in that sense. It's like, he's an alcoholic. It doesn't matter what sense you think it is. Shouldn't be having that at all. His dad as well is quite overpowering in the fact that he belittles Sam in front of people. So when they go to this restaurant, he says, we'll get lobster. But Sam can't have lobster. It does things to his stomach. So he's like, I'm not going to eat that if you buy it. He just wants something simple like chicken. But his dad's adamant. And he's being a real fucking pain in the ass about it. So Sam basically says, look, I'm going to go and speak to Ben. So he heads off, he speaks to Ben, because Ben is his sponsor. And he tries to get some advice about what to do about his father. And it's here that we learn that Sam's dad is actually one of his triggers as well. He really wants to drink at that point, and he needs Ben to talk him out of it and give him advice as to what to do. But of course, Ben's in a bad situation anyway, and he's drinking. He's literally drinking while he's on the phone to Sam at that point. And so, while he's pouring himself a drink, he ends up dropping his flask under the couch, where Claire sleeps. Loudermilk essentially tells Ben that he needs to book his ideas up, and next time that he rings, he needs better advice. Obviously, he doesn't know about the drinking yet, but we can imagine that he's going to find out at some point. Because at this point, Ben is not being subtle whatsoever. But I suppose that's the whole point of someone being in that way. They can be very, very sneaky, but the signs are there. Sam heads back to the table, and it's at this point that we learn the other side of his father. Because as Sam was walking away, Jack started to talk to the waitress. When Sam comes back to the table, his father is literally cradling this girl. Sam has had enough and goes back to his apartment and starts to vent a little bit about his father. They obviously don't see a problem with him, and by they I mean Claire and Ben. But Sam is adamant that his father is a piece of shit. He goes to bed, and not long after that, it is proven that his father is a piece of shit because his father is meant to be staying in Sam's bed with him just while he's stopping over in town. He's on his way to Vancouver to go and meet this woman at this point, but for now he's just stopping over. I believe they're in Seattle. And so Sam is awoken in the middle of the night by a lot of bouncing in his bed and a lot of noises coming from the person next to him. And it turns out his father is having sex with the waitress in his bed while his son is sleeping next to him. This man's a fucking animal. Sam leaves the room and heads back into the living room. He starts arguing with Claire about getting off the bed, but Claire basically doesn't want to. So Loudermilk ends up sleeping on the floor that night while his father continues to fuck this woman in his bed. And this woman at this point is probably about 20 years younger than he is, and he's probably in his 60s. So the next morning his father awakes him by doing press-ups next to Sam and basically teases him a little bit, and he's like, come on, what are we going to do today? Sam's unsure how to handle his father at this point, and his father says, I want to come to one of your group sessions. While he's at this group session, he is outrageous. Sam has to leave the room for a minute, and by the time he comes back in, his father is fighting with Cutter. Cutter has him in a headlock because essentially what he's told the group is, if you are clean for a month, you aren't an alcoholic. Which is fucking terrible advice for a group of people who believe they're alcoholics because they've ruined their life by drinking alcohol, and then some of them are like, well, I've been sober for 5 months, well, I've been sober for such and such, and you're like, yeah, but the point is that you're meant to stay sober because you don't just get over this shit. So his dad's really irresponsible and makes a mockery of what his son is doing. And so Sam gets pissed at his dad for doing all of this and basically ruining his group. That night when he gets home, his father tells him that he's got a masseuse coming over to sort out his neck now that Cutter has let go of it. And of course, once his masseuse gets there, they just end up fucking anyway. And it's really loud and really obnoxious. The same as the night before, it was really loud and it was really obnoxious. Don't get me wrong, I am all for loud sex, but not when you're at the expense of other people. It's not fair. And so now, Loudermilk is back on the floor out near Claire. He looks under the sofa and finds this flask. He asks Claire about it. She knows nothing about it. He bangs on his own door and his father answers. This girl leaves who was with him, and he essentially accuses his father of drinking in the flat. He and his father get into it, and his father denies all knowledge, right up until the point when he sees Ben poke his head round the corner and realises whose flask that is. This is the only redeeming point of this man. He takes the blame for Ben, although Ben needs help, so probably best not to, but he does so anyway. And then Loudermilk tells him basically, you've got to leave. They get into it again, and his father tells him, I'm going to invite that woman back. Loudermilk storms off, he's going to go get a hotel, and Alison sees him in the corridor. She tells him that he should just stay on her sofa and they can sort things out in the morning. However, throughout the apartments, all they can hear is Loudermilk's father having sex. The next morning, he goes back through and his father leaves, but he tells him before he goes that Sam needs to keep an eye on Ben because something's wrong. And only earlier on in the episode, Alison has asked the same thing. So Loudermilk needs to start looking at the signs when it comes to Ben. And then after Jack leaves, Claire comes out of the bathroom and reminds Loudermilk that, yep, your dad's a bit of a shit, but the man can fuck. Now, we don't actually see whether the woman comes back to fuck Jack. And if not, then I worry that the person that he was fucking was Claire, and that is 100% wrong. He is well into his 60s and she is like just out of school, so I hope that wasn't the case. But the way the whole thing came about looked a little bit suspect, so hopefully I don't have to worry too much about that. However, this episode was great. We really get a background of who Loudermilk is and more into the characters in and around him. The people in the group, like Roger and Cutter and this new guy Tom, we are getting more and more of who they are. And obviously in the previous episode we found out who Muggsy was, but we're also having to worry about Ben because something has happened to Ben and we don't know what it is, but he's in a bad situation and him drinking again isn't a good sign. So hopefully, it's probably going to be a season ender, that one, but hopefully Sam finds out what's been going on. The other thing we know is now Loudermilk and his ex-partner are now just separated. It's because of the accident, 100%, but we thought she was dead. So it's a very strange situation to realise that how wrong we actually were. And I say we, I mean the collective we, and by that I mean me. It's been an interesting show. It's been a great 4 episodes, and I cannot wait to cover the end of this. Obviously that's going to come in 2 weeks, but next week we're having a break from this. We're going to be going into Criminal UK. That is going to be 4 episodes, just that one series, and then we're done with Criminal UK as well. So we're getting through some stuff. And then I've already planned out season 9, and I will go into that in further detail probably next episode. But as for today, I'm done. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for being here, heading over to Instagram, heading over to Patreon, heading over to pick up some books, etc., etc. It's all good. I'm happy for the work that I'm doing, and I'm loving this podcast so much. But thank you for today. Hope you're all doing well out there. And until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye.